again later claim that they have solved the blockchain trilemma, but when you look at things in more detail, you see sometimes that they're going to reduce the number of nodes. So in fact, they're going to be compromising on decentralization. So one of the two other dimensions, is going to suffer. There's going to be a kind of trade-off. So why is it so important to talk about this blockchain trilemma? I think a lot of people agree that the Holy Grail, I like this expression very much for the industry today, is market adoption and even mass adoption. So we haven't quite reached that stage yet, unfortunately. The technology holds a lot of promises, but we're still waiting for that, massive adoption, market adoption. And because it's not about how strong or powerful or innovative your technology is on paper, success is always going to be contingent on mass adoption. So because this trilemma hasn't, been solved yet, there's this need to compromise on one of the two other dimensions, as I said, and I will try to explain why the focus needs to be on the first dimension, namely scalability. So try to improve scalability. So let's go back to the basics. I think a lot of the listeners here are very familiar with technology. This technology, blockchain technology, a bit of blockchain 101 here. You know that all the transactions are stored in blocks, that they are linked one to another as a chain in chronological order. And the result is supposed to be that these transactions afterwards are immutable and transparent to all peers. So this is the introduction to how blockchain is immutable and why it is, as a decentralized technology, probably preferable to some other more centralized solution. You probably remember this. There was a hack in Bangladesh 4 years ago. The central bank was hacked. I think there was an $81 million losses due to unauthorized transactions. And I think they were routed through the New York Federal Reserve using the SWIFT network. And the SWIFT network is the largest network in the world for interbank transfers or transactions. Blockchain was not used on this occasion. And some people argue that maybe it could have solved, or it could have helped to avoid this, this hack. Why? Because when you're using blockchain technology, you do not have any single points of failure or vulnerability in technology that you have when you are dealing with more centralized systems. And why is that? So a lot of you are probably familiar with 51% attacks. So if you want to alter a chain or blockchain, you need to take control of at least 51% of the computers in the same distributed ledger. And in fact, you need to do this in a very short period of time. I did roughly 10 minutes for Bitcoin. I'll be talking about Bitcoin in the first part of my presentation, because 10 minutes, that's the block generating time for, to the time it takes to generate a Bitcoin block. So this has never happened today. The Bitcoin blockchain was never hacked. We'll talk about the security problems, because I think we need to begin with security concerns, because there have been quite a lot of scams or hacks, and I'll explain at what level these scams have intervened. So Bitcoin is based on, so I'm going to try to explain first, or to introduce this trilemma through Bitcoin, and then afterwards I will move to some other maybe more practical use cases. So Bitcoin is based, as you know, on proof of work. and proof of work mechanism, which is going to champion decentralization and security, but unfortunately it's going to compromise on scalability. Bitcoin is a public blockchain, so anybody can access Bitcoin network, start transacting. All you need is an internet connection. You need to download a Bitcoin wallet, and then here you go. We have achieved, or the Bitcoin network has achieved, decentralization. Maybe I would like to add here in theory. What does it mean for a network to be decentralized? It means that the data is distributed across multiple nodes in the network. So if ever you have a node which gets corrupted, it can happen. It's not going to affect the whole network because you don't have any, as I said before, single point of failure. So it ensures what we call censorship resistance. And the nodes are considered equals in a democratic environment where everyone can cast an equal vote. So that's for Bitcoin. Now, if you're dealing with other cryptocurrencies, other blockchains, it's always possible to modulate slightly this environment by introducing what we call super nodes or master nodes that enjoy more voting power. But that's another topic. So decentralization, there is a raging debate today about Bitcoin. Is it really decentralized? And the debate tends to shift to the concentration of mining power. There's a lot of reference made to these mining pools. A lot of them are located in China. Why? Because in China is enjoying cost advantage, for the production of energy, of electricity. In spite of these drawbacks, we're going to assume that Bitcoin actually scores well on decentralization in spite of what I just said, these concentration trends. I was saying to you that the Bitcoin blockchain has never been hacked today, but I was telling you at the same time that scams and hacks are quite frequent anyway. And this is because they involve so-called third-party applications. So these cybersecurity risks are quite significant, but in fact, they're going to pertain to external application layers and not the blockchain itself. And I think it's important to highlight this, to underline this, that the blockchain or the Bitcoin blockchain is still extremely secure. Now, does it mean that the blockchain can never be hacked, that it's, invulnerable? I think it can be hacked. I'm top of being a associate professor in a French university. I'm a fellow of the British Blockchain Association. I'm also the associate editor-in-chief of the Journal of British Blockchain Association, which means I review papers, I help make some editorial decisions about publication. And we had a very interesting paper recently published by an American researcher. His name is Roy Campbell, and he has done some great work on quantum computing. And you've probably, come across these discussions. The question is whether blockchain or blockchains, not just the Bitcoin blockchain, but all types of blockchains could be vulnerable to quantum computing attack. I think the answer is maybe. Like part of the, Buterin was saying this, Vitalik Buterin was saying that part of cryptography can sometimes, under certain conditions, under certain assumptions, be vulnerable to quantum computer attack. But if you take, I would say, the core component process of cryptography in the Bitcoin blockchain, which is hashing, the hashing functions. This is still quantum computer resistant, which means that even if you deploy all these quantum computers, you're not going to be able to hack the Bitcoin blockchain. But there's a lot of ongoing research in this field at the moment, and it's all very interesting. Something that we need to point out is that because I'm going to talk more about scalability issues now, Bitcoin can process 4.6 transactions per second. While it's a figure, it might not be the most recent figure because things actually do, this number will fluctuate. But the idea here is that Bitcoins are getting more and more difficult to mine through this proof of work architecture, because the network is requiring actually a lot more computational power, electricity, if you will, as the network grows. So transaction verification is also something time consuming with Bitcoin, because each node has to validate the new state of the ledger following a well-known consensus mechanism. So I was talking about the transaction, number of transactions per second. Another figure here is the time it takes, or the average time it takes to validate a transaction, a Bitcoin transaction. And in May, so last month, this transaction, or this average confirmation time, was 9.6 minutes, down from 12 minutes a year before. So you see it's not necessarily increasing, but I won't say it's just an average. Like some small transactions that attract very small transaction fees, sometimes they get longer, they take longer to be confirmed, to get confirmed, and sometimes up to 24 hours for very small micro transactions. So the bottom line of everything I'm saying is that Bitcoin today is not scalable. It's one big problem with with Bitcoin network. It's not scalable. It does not stand 1 second the comparison with Visa, 1,700 transactions per second on average, but some people from the Visa network would argue that actually the network can process a lot more transactions per second. So the bottom line is that Bitcoin doesn't stand a comparison, but it's the same for every public blockchain, such as Ethereum. The number of transactions per second is barely, it's barely any better than the Bitcoin network. So Vitalik Buterin, if we consider that there's this trilemma today, the focus has to be on scalability, because this is the big bottleneck that the industry is facing. So Buterin is talking here about Ethereum, because he's the founder of Ethereum. Today, the Ethereum blockchain is almost full. And if you are a big company, a big organization, and then you want to join, or you want to implement some kind of smart contract solution for your organization, you're going to have a cost benefit calculation, and you will see that in fact you're going to end up competing with everyone for transaction space, so which is already expensive. And then because the scalability problem of the Ethereum blockchain, it's going to get even more expensive. He said even 5 times more expensive because of Ethereum. So this is pressure that is keeping people from joining the Ethereum network. And he said, okay, we really need to focus on scalability, because this is probably the major bottleneck that the industry is facing today. So why is scalability so important? So what are the pros and cons? Scalability ensures that applications run on the blockchain are going to operate at an optimal speed, and at the same time they will be able to support a high volume of transactions, and the application will be less likely to break down in case the user demand is greater than assumed. So it's definitely something desirable to have a scalable network. What are the disadvantages of scalability? It's a bit what I was saying before. When your network grows, it will be not impossible, but more difficult and costly to implement new security measures. So we are falling back onto the trilemma that is, the object of our discussion or presentation today. Now, not everything in the blockchain space is about cryptocurrencies. I know it is how it all started 10, 11 years ago. I recently got very interested in some, extremely practical, very relevant use case, namely the use of or the application of blockchain technology for online voting. And like me, that we've just how relevant this topic is these days, because we have gone through these terrible weeks of global pandemic, and a lot of companies have had to make the decision to sometimes to resort or not to online voting, for instance, for on the occasion of the annual shareholders meeting. Because people could not be physically present to cast their vote. And the idea that things could be moved, shifted to the blockchain, of course, is very appealing. I don't have any technical or how do I say that, coding experience with a smart contract, but I did a bit of research into it and find out that what's something I thought was quite, straightforward. When you're voting, you need to have a question. What are you voting for? You need to cast a ballot. You need to count the number of ballots, and then the winner will be the one who has attracted the more votes. I thought it was very straightforward, but when you want to translate this into a blockchain smart contract coding language, actually it gets a bit more complex. There are different steps. So these are slides that I borrowed from another presentation of mine, but I'll say, okay, these are the different procedures that need to be complied with, that need to be found to devise the architecture of a blockchain-based voting system. So I will not go in detail in the interest of time, but you see you need to have a proof of valid origin, proof of valid voter, that the person it's a bit about digital identity. The person who is voting is actually who he or she pretends he or she is. Proof of valid ballot, proof of valid vote, proof of mixing, proof of valid tally. So all these procedures need to be complied with if you want to organize some kind of blockchain-based or efficient blockchain-based voting system. And also you need to assign some roles on the smart contract. You need to have an administrator, of course, the voters. So in the case of the shareholder meeting, these are the shareholders. And you need to have an external observer who is going to monitor, it's going to be an independent observer. So it's not complicated. Yes, it's kind of complicated for the coders, the smart contract coders. And my research, I found out that storing all these data that I mentioned actually can take a lot of space. And a blockchain, given the scalability of the blockchains or the main blockchains today, we are going to be able to implement this voting smart contract architecture up to 40 participants in a boardroom, for instance, if you are electing the board members in a company. So 40 participants, this is, light years away from a national scale election. So we're not able to organize national scale election today. And even I want to say multinational corporations sometimes have a lot more board members. So here we find the limitations of the technology in a way, because the technology is not scalable enough. We have some kind of technical limitations for a very useful, important use case here, online voting that is completely, secure and transparent. So there are a number of solutions that exist, and I will go through them, but not in detail. I'll give you a review of these different blockchain solutions. I'll just start with so-called on-chain blockchain design. So you can include here block structure, consensus algorithm, and also working on the structure of the main chain. You're probably familiar with Bitcoin Cash, which is the outcome of a fork 3 years ago with the Bitcoin chain or main chain. The idea here was to increase the block size. So it's one solution, try to increase the block size. Compact block relay is the method of reducing the amount of bandwidth used to propagate new blocks to full nodes. A very popular technique, which is discussed in depth today, is sharding, and I will touch on it just in an instant because I think it's super important. And also the design of new consensus algorithms to make things more scalable. So Vitalik Buterin said recently that it's important that blockchain networks actually evolve away from the idea that every computer is required to verify every transaction to a model whereby a computer on average only verifies a small portion of all the transactions. So this is very much what sharding is about. In the Bitcoin network, every node has to verify all the transactions. So it takes forever. It doesn't take forever, but obviously this is slowing down the network and is standing in the way of the scalability. There's a very interesting company doing some great work, Algorand. You've probably heard of them before. This is so a shift from proof of work towards proof of stake, and Ethereum is trying to do the same thing at the moment. So the pure POS solution, Algorand transactions in fact achieve finality by default, whereas on the Bitcoin blockchain you have a 10-minute block time or generation time for blocks, so that transaction history is not overwritten by finality problems. What Algorand does instead, they achieve very, very swift block times, sometimes just a few seconds. And what they do, they have a small committees that validate each block. And the members or the committee members, they don't have to interact, they don't have to be in contact with each other. So Algorand has devised a very innovative cryptographic self-selection technique. And unlike these proof of work protocols, these nodes don't need to devote any time and computing resources to solve these cryptographically difficult, complex puzzles that are called hashing. Okay, so this is a brief summary of so the delegated proof of stake. So this is similar to what I was saying before with Algorand. Here we have a consensus mechanism that will be combining real-time voting with a social system of reputation in order to achieve consensus. So stakeholders, they can use their coin balance, because you still have a coin which is circulating in the network, and they use this balance to elect a delegate. And this delegate is going to validate the blocks on behalf of all the nodes in the network. Now, it may happen that a delegate is going to fall out of line because of maybe faulty or late reporting. In this case, there's an automatic procedure that is going to ensure that these the nodes will vote in a replacement for this delegate. It means the delegate has to be efficient, otherwise it's going to be voted out. So we have here a very interesting self-governing network, which is policed or disciplined by the participants themselves. So it's a really beautiful, very promising architecture. And it's going to ensure a better distribution of the rewards. Individuals will elect delegates who will give them the most rewards. So that will work in favor of the efficiency of the network. So as a result, everybody is going to be rewarded, not just the richest stakeholders. So here we have an argument in favor of proof of stake. I was telling you about some of the drawbacks with proof of work and the concentration of mining power, here we have a potential solution to this problem. So security is ensured by real-time voting. If we have any malicious attempt which is detected by voters, it's always possible to kick out this offending party to get rid of him. There is a downside anyway, that delegates are still able in a way that is very endogenous to organize themselves, a bit like in the real world, in cartel-like groups, by making the whole network more centralized. And so this is not always easy to prevent. Now, I was telling you about online solutions. There are some on-chain solutions. There are some off-chain solutions that I would like to review quickly with you. These off-chain solutions are about adding a second layer to the main blockchain in order to facilitate faster transactions. So it's very much about building a secondary protocol on top of the main chain, and these transactions are going to get offloaded from the main chain in order to save space and reduce congestion. Some famous examples: the Bitcoin Lightning Network and the Plasma, which is in fact a side chain which was pioneered by Ethereum. Cross-chain solutions are also very innovative solutions which have emerged over the last few years. Cosmos is a very good example thereof. You're going to connect multiple independent blockchains in order to establish more integrated network. So there are a lot of solutions here. Vitalik Buterin is somebody who is very, very open-minded. I would describe him as somebody who is agnostic as far as solutions to the scalability problem or bottleneck are concerned. He is very much open to a proposal to implement the Bitcoin Lightning Network as an interface for Ethereum contracts to enable instant payments in Bitcoin, while simultaneously triggering a series of events on Ethereum, such as a smart contract or any other chain. The idea is to go about and try to experiment with different chains, with different blockchains, in order to solve the scalability problem. Also, he said that we could try to use the Bitcoin Cash blockchain as a temporary scalability solution for the Ethereum blockchain. Now, something I would like to discuss with you now, which I think is extremely relevant to discussion today, is that sometimes we get excessively focused on blockchain technology, and when we tend to lose sight of the umbrella term of distributed ledger technology solution, DLT, because in fact, blockchain, as you know, is just a subset of DLT. So in the blockchain technology, you have blocks which are linked one to another in a chronological order, a linear chain topology. In distinction to blockchain linear topology, you have this DLT called directed acyclic graph, or DAG, which removes which is more recent than blockchain, which removes the limitation of blocks. So I'm not going to enter into details that are too technical here. I will say that the new transactions, or the newly generated transactions, are not going to be packed into blocks as in the blockchain, but the network is going to establish itself in different directions, and each transaction is going to be confirmed by one or two previous transactions, and the idea or the objective is to get a very high probability that the confirmation will happen over the next transaction. So we'll get the same result that we get with the Bitcoin blockchain, which is immutability with the impossibility to corrupt the network. So you're going to have a set of iterative rounds. There's a main graph, so hence the terminology directed acyclic graph, which is going to form with a low probability of being reversed. These, I know directed acyclic graphs is a technique which is used, for instance, we've just had a pandemic in epidemiology to try to understand the consequences or to predict the future evolution of epidemics. But it's also used in the blockchain in the crypto space. And I think it was first devised by some Russian, especially the company IOTA, which is a very strong example of the implementation of this DLT solution. Some Russian mathematicians, and you know, like me, that Russia has a very strong school of mathematics, and they have devised this, the application of a DAG to a distributed ledger technology in a way that is very smart and very, very useful, because the advantages of a DAG include greater scalability, and this is what we're talking about today, and also lower transaction fees. So here a bit of a summary of what you can achieve by using a DAG instead of a traditional blockchain. You're going to have a network that is going to work faster, even if its size increases. So it's going to be more scalable. So it's one solution, a proposed solution to the scalability problem that we are discussing. And another advantage is that there is no mining on DAG. So there are no high transaction fees that you can sometimes come across with some other blockchains. And it can be used in cases where the blockchain is not feasible. When you have a bottleneck, that we're talking about online voting earlier on, DAG can be used here, can take over when blockchain is no longer operational or doesn't deliver. And something, and I was telling you about IOTA, the founder, or one person in charge of IOTA said, but he first came across a blockchain, he figured out that it was a brilliant technology, but he would only be dragged towards the industry if he could see potential use cases that would actually work. And a typical example here, I think, would be the IoT, the Internet of Things. You have all these small sensors, you have a wide range of applications in healthcare, digital identity, governance, etc. So all these nano transactions carried out by IoT devices can actually work much faster by resorting to DAG, or directed acyclic graph. So typical examples: IOTA's Tangle network, Hashgraph. I'm going to talk about Hashgraph now, which is also a very nice example. Byteball. So Hedera Hashgraph, I think it was one of the first cryptocurrency to be based entirely on DAG. So it's a recent or relatively recent technology created in 2016, based on synchronous Byzantine fault tolerance consensus algorithm. In theory, it could reach up to 500,000 transactions per second. So we have here a scalability level which is so much higher than what we find with more traditional blockchain. So this is a graph or a chart to show you a bit like the organization of DAG. So you see it's kind of different than the typical block architecture that we find in blockchain networks. So yeah, it's over time the graph expands. Here are the three founders of Hashgraph, who describe basically what is going on, what is happening with the DAG procedures. At the end of each round, each node calculates the shared state after processing all transactions that were received in that round and before. And it digitally signs a hash of that shared state, puts in a transaction, and gossips out to the community. So we have some strong similarities with more traditional blockchain, but still it's different because transactions are not going to be put together or written together in blocks. Still some comments about this DLT, which is not blockchain. Some criticism by a very eminent, distinguished professor at Cornell University, Emin Sir, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. The correctness of the entire hash graph protocol seems to hinge on every participant knowing and agreeing upon the number of participants in the system. And this is, he says, he argues, it's a very difficult number to determine in an open, dynamic distributed system. So one of the founders of the technology here replied to him and said, all of the nodes at a given, all of the nodes at a given time actually know how many nodes there are. So it's not a valid criticism. I think maybe a stronger critique here, or criticism, comes from the fact that Hedera has established what I call a governing council. It's very similar to, I didn't have too much time to talk about Libra, but I think it was a bit off the topic. But here there's some similarities because Libra has set up this association, and a lot of people are arguing that the network, if you have some big parties, actors, companies, organizations that actually are in control of the network, it's no longer a truly decentralized solution. So again, we are falling back onto the blockchain trilemma that we are talking about. So this is one criticism that was made. The idea is that they try to counterattack this criticism, saying that each company, let's say you're having a board room and a private blockchain, and people are voting for board members, or any other application that you might want to take into account. You have a one company, one vote system implemented in order to restrict one given party from accumulating too much power and sway on the network. This is the arguments which is put forward by Hashgraph. But like me, and if you take the example of the United Nations, it's based on the same one country, one vote principle. But in practice, what happens, the United Nations, small countries tend to vote like larger countries. They have a similar voting pattern sometimes. It's hard to explain why this happens in a way that is transparent, because we're talking about, invisible politics here. So maybe the same kind of criticism here could be, we could be targeted here and saying, yes, it's not true that this one company, one vote system actually neutralizes the centralization argument of a hash graph. I'm going to conclude now my talk. I have 2 more slides. So as a conclusion, I would like to say today that distributed ledgers, they have different use cases. There is this debate or discussion that we just touched on, whether it's better to have some big companies, like in Libra or Hedera, that are securing the network to make it work, to make it transparent, as opposed to blockchain, to Bitcoin, where anybody can jump in, but the side effect can be that you're going to have some miners that are coming sometimes from dubious parts of the world that are not subject to any KYC verification or investigation. that are going to validate transaction. So in fact, at the end of the day, what is better? To have these big companies that are going to secure the network in the first place, or to have some more public anonymous system? Again, it's the trilemma that we're talking about here. We have to make some trade-offs at some stage, because Bitcoin gives up scalability for security and decentralization, but Bitcoin today very much works as a store of value, even though, as you know, it's a very volatile store of value, but it doesn't quite work as a functional day-to-day payment system as it was initially devised in the white paper by Nakamoto in 2008. This is what Bitcoin was supposed to be, and then turned out to be, something else. On the other hand, DAG offers a more exciting and promising solution to the problem of scalability, and also in a way to the blockchain trilemma. And it's going to be possible to implement this DLT with a much wider range of, much more variety of use cases. I would like to finish with some advice to investors, because I know you have a lot of investors among your listeners and your audience and your contributors. What I would say at the micro level, it's always good to do your homework and check the progress of individual companies to delve into the business models. It's also very important to look at DLT in general and not just blockchain. So the generic term is distributed ledger technology, and blockchain is just one subset. And of course, analyze the trade-offs that exist between these related technology sometimes. Now, what is going to happen, and what at the macro level, what we need to be concerned with is mass adoption. When is it going to happen? Okay, nobody has a crystal ball, but the main message that I wish to come across, to get across today, was that I think mass adoption of blockchain technology, or DLT, is very much contingent on the resolution of this blockchain trilemma. And when is this going to happen? I think investors here need to feel the market in a way and try to anticipate what I call this tipping point, and when the day the market has enacted that, in fact, DLT now is a mature technology, and things are going to change for better. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. I hope I was not too long with my presentation, and I will leave the floor to Nadia.
Thank you so much for that in-depth report and actually overview on what could be done better in terms of solutions for blockchain and the issues we are currently facing on the market. So what would be, so you mentioned what should be in the focus of attention of investors, right? What should be in the focus of attention of startups actually in the blockchain? What could you mention on that? Because there is an issue of resources, decentralization, scalability, security, and control at the same time. So lots of startups in different spheres trying to get global, and also mining resources at the same time. So what should be in the focus of attention of startups to cope with the current situation and find the best solution for themselves?
Mm-hmm. So definitely not an easy question here to answer. I think some of the insights that I tried to to share with you today is very much about a framing of reality, a framing of the blockchain space, which I tried to apprehend through this trilemma, which basically says that you have 3 dimensions, and you cannot score perfectly on these 3 dimensions at the same time. But the startup companies that are going to invest or that are going to devise some business plans in the current environment, which is very, very challenging, but also at the same time very very interesting, very open. I'd say they would have to position themselves towards this trilemma, okay? If they want to, and I think this is what Buterin is saying, is that the emphasis should be on scalability. Try to make solutions that are more scalable, because if you want to implement these, I don't know, Internet of Things, IoT, sensors, devices, it's only going to work out with a scalable solution. So scalability is something that is definitely something that startups should look for. But at the same time, I don't want to say that Bitcoin and Ethereum are things of the past, because they are trying very hard, and I'll tell you, to try to solve this problem through online and offline solutions. So here the idea, it's always a bit of a cost benefit analysis. You want to rely on established technologies. For instance, smart contracts. It's difficult to get anything better than Ethereum at the moment. But at the same time, I think it's to answer your question, Nadia, your business model will be the answer to that question. So the business model will dictate your priorities, what you want to do, and then afterwards you can have your reflection on how to best devise your strategy, your business strategy.
Thank you. And what should be the component of the community? Because now, as you represented in your cases for voting and other decentralized modes, is the society ready for these solutions? Because we have developed markets, emerging markets, different types of governments, and appetite for control as to balance this decentralization in general, and the new models which are entering all the societies across the world. Now we have pandemic as the kind of the first global, truly global event, which actually covered most of the countries. You cannot escape that much of that. And what do you think about this social and community component to interfere?
It's a fundamental question, and I've been asked several times before, and I think it's so extremely relevant today. Is society ready? Whenever I'm asked this question, I say no. I do this on purpose, because it means that we need to, we need to get one step higher than what we are at the moment. This is why you are so important, LA Token, for all the work you do for bringing awareness to, stakeholders, of course, investors, but not only, government, people, also small investors and companies and startups, so that there's this growing awareness. And about the recent pandemic, or still unfortunately ongoing pandemic in many countries, it's always about, turning a threat into an opportunity. So see how, and I'm thinking here about healthcare use cases, applications, how we could devise new use cases to try to solve real world problems that we are facing today with this pandemic, and how this technology actually could be some kind of problem solving momentum or force in society. And that way people will be able to relate to it in a way that is more convincing and more efficient. If you can show them in a way the technology that, it's potentially problem solving, that it can address some very practical problems in their lives, this is going to grow a stronger sense of community around all the issues that I've been talking about today. So I'm not sure I answered your question. It's extremely important and relevant. You're doing a fantastic job at LA Token. This is why I enjoy every time I get the occasion to speak here or work with you. We need to, carry on the good work. and also propose some use cases that answer real world problems, that people can relate more easily to.
Yeah, and it's also a question of resources and control, because this is not only the decentralized mode of for transactions and the higher speed of technologies and availability, as you mentioned, for some of your solutions, 500,000 transactions per second is the new level of speed that can be reached, right? And the technology is far advanced, right? Then we are ready to, in terms of global wise, to adopt that. And what about the decentralization of resources, control in general, global wise, and what could be the kind of hurdles on that way? Because we see that most of the wealth area is still quite centralized, and maybe in the top 1% of population, right? And of course, this drive on the level of small and medium enterprises and investors supporting more of the decentralized mode and scalable business model for more people to join and have accessibility to different of these solutions. And what's going on with the global elite. So is there a way to balance, and or it's more of a competition because more of global players, they're now also entering blockchain and all these crypto spaces being more attractive, and we have more of a giant. You mentioned also Libra case and so on. So will that be still a control over these decentralized solutions in terms of regulation as well? And would that be a real case that more of people getting access to these solutions, or still on the level of regulations, it's too much of competition for them because they don't have enough resources to equally participate in their solutions?
Yeah, I'm thinking at the same time you were asking your question, Nadia. I think, I live in a French city where there have been some, over the last few days, some social unrest, some young people, some kind of violent protests. And I think that income, wealth, inequalities is one of the driving factors of the, social problems, social unrest. So it's definitely something that needs to be tackled. And at the same time, it's always the question, how do we go about and tackle this huge question? And it's true that it seems to me that the technology, and I'm definitely not speaking here with some kind of authority, because I know that a lot of people who are more competent than I am, but it seems to me that, this decentralized finance or whatever pertains to the democratization of capital markets, here we have a very promising avenue that we need to continue to explore. And I would say, especially right now in these very challenging times that we are living, because of the coming economic crisis that we are already, facing, that is going to be very severe, unfortunately. You have a lot of people who, unfortunately, are going to find themselves excluded from the main circuits of finance. So in fact, it's a sense of emergency. What you're talking about, your question, Nadia, it's not just about should we wait for regulation so that we can compete. I don't think it's like, you should look at the problem like that. You need to look at the societal challenges that we are facing at the moment. And then I think regulation should adapt, to these challenges so that we can come up with some solutions that in a way that is endogenous, that the industry can thrive for, a business growth. And at the same time, to try to tackle these societal challenges that we're talking about, with this access to finance and wealth inequalities and things like this. This is why Libra. We've been talking about Libra. Not everything is bad, with Libra. We like to tend to try to paint things in a black and white fashion with Facebook, etc. All these solutions that are going to improve access to financial services in payments in the developing world, for instance, I think are very welcome. It's very timely to get going with these use cases, trying to make it easier for people to be empowered, at the economic level, even at the grassroots level, to try, to start up a small business venture. So if we can work towards this kind of progress, yes, we can, feel that we're working in the right direction. Now, I'm not saying this is easy, but I think the issue you're pointing out is definitely one of the most important, actually, relevant of our time. So it's a huge chapter.
Yes, and what should be the key question we should keep in mind, both for entrepreneurs and investors, to keep this focus, not to be too much overwhelmed with the technology, which can be easily manipulated also in terms of directions of its development, but to stick up with the focus. What do you think that would be important on the agenda of investors and entrepreneurs? Maybe your final address of our today's keynote?
Consistency and vision. I'm a bit naive. I'm a bit idealistic sometimes, and I think very often in entrepreneurs, it's true too with investors, but I think it's even more relevant for a lot of entrepreneurs. They nurture a vision, which in fact is going to define the whole project in a way that is, they're going to relate to it as, something that is personal. I think this vision is something that needs to be cultivated, okay? But although the whole technology, the vision has to become compatible and consistent with the latest technological developments in the space. So my answer to your question again, that is very deep and profound, is that trying to harmonize your vision, what propels you as an entrepreneur or possibly an investor, and try to make things harmonious with the technological environment, the fast-changing pace, environment that surrounds us at the same time.
Thank you so much for this in-depth masterclass, and we welcome you also to participate in various forms of our other interactive formats between investors and entrepreneurs, which are not only keynotes, roadshows, speech competitions, but also you're welcome to join our Startup Leaders Club to interact directly with entrepreneurs who are also facing new challenges, opportunities, and actually build the new emerging trends. So we welcome you to these brainstorming sessions, and also maybe you can advise us on the new formats of interaction we can create together, because you also have quite a community of your own, which can be easily integrated into the broader one. So everything is between this local global, and the speed of interaction between this local global is scaling tremendously, and you also showed a lot of new integrative solutions for that. Thank you so much, and see you soon on our other events, and stay healthy and keep up